The sound that tore through the afternoon quiet wasn't my mobile phone, with its cheerful, modern jingle. It was the old landline, the cream-colored rotary phone I kept on the hall table more for decoration than for use. Its shrill, insistent ring was a sound from another time, a frantic alarm that spoke of emergencies and shattered peace. My heart, which had been beating to the gentle rhythm of a quiet Tuesday, began to hammer against my ribs. No one ever called that phone. No one, unless the world had tilted on its axis. My name is Eleanor Finch, and for the past 10 years, since my husband Arthur passed, my world had been a small and predictable one. I lived in a stone cottage in a sleepy corner of Cornwall, where the most dramatic event of the day was the tide rolling in over the gray sands of Porthcurno Beach. I tended my roses, I read my books, and I waited. I was always in some quiet, unacknowledged corner of my soul, waiting for a call from my son, Thomas. Our relationship, once the central pillar of my existence, had become a fragile, splintered thing. We hadn't had a real conversation in nearly 3 years. Just stiff, awkward pleasantries on birthdays and at Christmas, exchanges that felt more like obligations than connections. The silence between us was a vast, cold ocean, and I no longer remembered how to build a bridge to cross it. The last time we spoke, truly spoke, it ended in a fight. Words were thrown like stones, words about his life in London, his choices, his refusal to settle down. I had said things born of fear, a mother's desperate fear of seeing her child adrift, and he had heard them as judgment. He had hung up, and a wall of static had stood between us ever since. I snatched the heavy receiver from its cradle, my hand trembling. "Hello." The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and utterly devoid of comfort. "Am I speaking with Mrs. Eleanor Finch?" "Yes, this is she," I managed, my throat suddenly dry. "Mrs. Finch, I'm calling from St. Thomas Hospital in London. Your son, Thomas Finch, was admitted this morning. He's been in an accident." The world didn't just tilt. It fell away completely, leaving me in a freefall of pure, unadulterated terror. An accident. The word was a blunt instrument, crude and brutal. It offered no details, only a canvas onto which my mind projected the most horrific images. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The voice on the phone continued, something about him being stable, but the words were just noise. The only word I heard was accident. I don't remember ending the call. I remember the receiver clattering back onto the cradle. I remember looking at my hands, seeing not the hands of a 62-year-old woman, but the hands of a young mother, remembering how they had once checked for fevers, bandaged scraped knees, and smoothed back a sleeping boy's unruly hair. My Thomas. My beautiful, stubborn, distant boy. There was no thought, only instinct. I grabbed my purse, my car keys, and the old tweed coat that still smelled faintly of Arthur's pipe tobacco. The 5-hour drive to London stretched before me like an eternity. As I pulled out of my gravel driveway, the carefully tended roses in my garden blurred into a smear of pink and red. The tidy, predictable world I had built for myself had been a fortress of denial, and its walls had just been reduced to rubble. The motorway was a gray ribbon unwinding into a hazy unknown. Every car that passed seemed to be filled with happy families, their lives untouched by the cold dread that had taken root in my chest. My mind became a relentless slideshow of memories, each one tinged with a fresh and agonizing coat of regret. I saw Thomas as a toddler, his face a perfect circle of concentration as he took his first wobbly steps towards me, his arms outstretched. I saw him at 7, his front teeth missing, proudly holding up a drawing of our family, the 3 of us stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun. I remembered the arguments of his teenage years, the slammed doors, and the music played so loud the floorboards vibrated. I had thought that was the hardest part. I had been so naive. The silence of these last few years was so much worse. It was a living, breathing entity, a monster that fed on unspoken words and unresolved pain. What was the last thing I had truly said to him? "You're throwing your life away, Thomas." The memory was a physical blow, winding me. What if those were the last words he ever heard from me? What if I never had the chance to take them back? I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I wasn't just driving to a hospital. I was driving towards a reckoning. I was driving to beg for a forgiveness I wasn't sure I deserved. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Let him be okay. Please, just let him be okay. I will do anything. I will be better. I will listen. Just give me the chance. The city rose up to meet me, a sprawling beast of glass and steel. The traffic, the noise, the sheer number of people, it was an assault on my senses after the peace of my coastal village. Finding the hospital was a nightmare of one-way streets and blaring horns. When I finally pulled into the cavernous underground car park, my entire body was shaking. I ran from the car, not bothering to check if I'd locked it. The hospital was a labyrinth of polished floors and sterile white walls, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and an underlying hum of quiet suffering. I found the main reception desk, my voice a frantic, breathless whisper as I asked for my son. Thomas Finch. He was in an accident. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, typed his name into her computer. He's on the Kennington ward, 4th floor. The lifts are just over there. My relief was so potent it almost buckled my knees. He was on a ward, not in intensive care, not in surgery. A ward. That had to be a good sign. Hope, fragile and tentative, began to bloom in the barren landscape of my fear. I rode the lift in a state of suspended animation. The doors opened onto another long, sterile corridor. I could hear the beep of machines, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes, the murmur of hushed conversations. I saw the sign for Kennington Ward and began to walk faster, my heart pounding in a rhythm of hope and dread. I saw his room number, 412, just ahead. The door was slightly ajar. My son was in there. My Thomas. I was only a few feet away from him. All the apologies, all the love I had suppressed for years rose up in a tidal wave. I was about to push the door open, to rush to his side, to hold his hand and tell him I was there. But before my hand could touch the wood, a figure in blue scrubs stepped out from a small alcove, blocking my path. She was a nurse, older than the receptionist, with kind, discerning eyes that held a surprising firmness. She put a gentle hand on my arm. "Mrs. Finch?" "Eleanor," she asked softly, her voice low and urgent. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the door. How is he?" "He's stable." "He's awake," she said, but her grip on my arm tightened slightly. "Listen to me very carefully. I need you to come with me. You can't go in there right now." "What?" "Why?" I tried to pull away, a fresh wave of panic cresting. "He's my son. He needs me." The nurse looked me directly in the eye, her expression a complex mixture of compassion and warning. Her next words made the air in my lungs turn to ice. "I know he does," she said. "But right now, you need to hide. And you need to wait." My mind went blank. Hide? Hide from my own child? The word was nonsensical alien. It didn't belong here, in this moment of desperate reunion. I stared at her, then at the door to room 412, and a cold, terrifying dread began to snake its way around my heart. I froze, every muscle in my body locking into place, as the first glimmer of a horrifying, impossible reason began to dawn. Why on earth would a mother have to hide? The nurse, whose name tag read Sarah, saw the unraveling in my eyes. Her voice was a low, steady anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. "Please, Eleanor, let's just go to the family room down the hall. I will explain everything, I promise. But we cannot stand here." Her urgency was undeniable. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command wrapped in kindness. I allowed her to lead me, my feet feeling like lead weights. Each step away from Thomas's door felt like a betrayal. My mind was a frantic storm of questions. Was he in trouble with the police? Had the accident been his fault? Did he do something so terrible that he was now a danger? Or was he so angry with me, so consumed by our last fight, that he had told them he didn't want to see me? The thought was a shard of glass in my heart. Sarah guided me into a small, quiet room furnished with a few worn armchairs and a low table littered with out-of-date magazines. The window looked out onto a brick wall. It was a room designed for waiting, for receiving bad news, for quiet grief. She closed the door, shutting out the sounds of the ward and enclosing us in an almost suffocating silence. I turned on her, the dam of my composure finally breaking. "You have to tell me what's going on. Is he all right?" Does he not want me here? Did I do this? Is it because of our fight? The words tumbled out, a confession and a plea all in one. Sarah motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing, too agitated to be still. She waited a moment, letting my frantic energy fill the space, and then she spoke, her tone measured and impossibly gentle. Eleanor, she began, Thomas is going to be fine. Physically. He has a concussion, a broken arm, and some deep bruising, but he is incredibly lucky. The accident was not his fault. He is not in any trouble. A tiny measure of relief washed over me, but it was immediately replaced by a deeper confusion. Then why? Why must I hide from him? Sarah took a deep breath, and the look she gave me was one of profound empathy. It was the look of someone about to deliver life-altering news. He doesn't know you're here, Eleanor. No one called you at his request. The hospital has a policy to contact next of kin in these situations. But Thomas, he has someone with him in that room. And he is seeing them for the very first time. I stared at her, uncomprehending. Someone with him? A friend? His boss? Sarah shook her head slowly. No, not a friend. She paused, choosing her words with the precision of a surgeon. Eleanor, 22 years ago, when Thomas was just 18, he had a daughter. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, hanging in the sterile air of the small room. A daughter. Thomas? My Thomas, who could barely keep a houseplant alive, who I still saw as a boy who needed my guidance. It was impossible. It was a mistake. No, I whispered, the word barely audible. No, you're mistaken. He doesn't have a child. I would know. I'm his mother. He would have told me. The certainty in my own voice sounded hollow, even to me. The silence between us, the years of distance, suddenly seemed to hold a new and terrible weight. What else did I not know about my son? Sarah's eyes were filled with a sorrow that was not her own. He was 18. The mother was a girl he knew briefly. They were both terrified. They made the decision together to give the baby up for adoption, a closed adoption. He said he never told you because he was ashamed. He was afraid of what you would think of him, of how you would react. He has carried this secret, this grief, alone for over 2 decades. I sank into one of the armchairs, the strength draining from my body as if a plug had been pulled. A daughter. A granddaughter. A whole person, a part of my family, had existed in the world for 22 years, and I had known nothing. The secret was so monumental it seemed to suck all the air from the room. My mind reeled back through the years. Thomas at 18. He had been so withdrawn that year, so sullen. I had attributed it to teenage angst, to exams, to a row he'd had with his father. I never once suspected the truth was so much larger, so much more painful. I had been so wrapped up in my own world, my own expectations of him, that I had been blind to his suffering. The young woman in that room, Sarah continued, her voice soft, is Lily. That's his daughter. She found him. She has been searching for him for the last few years. She contacted him for the first time just last week, through a letter. They were supposed to meet for a coffee this morning. That's where he was going when the accident happened. My God. The cruelty of it, the impossible, beautiful, terrible timing of it all. He was on his way to meet the daughter he had never known, and he had almost been taken from her before they ever had a chance. When he was brought in, Sarah explained, his wallet was open on the passenger seat, and her letter was right there. We found her number. We called her. She came immediately. She was here when he woke up from the concussion. Eleanor, the first person your son saw when he opened his eyes was the daughter he has spent a lifetime mourning. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. They weren't just tears of shock, but tears of a profound and hollow sadness. Sadness for my son's secret pain, for the lonely burden he had carried. Sadness for the young, scared boy he had been, who felt he couldn't come to his own mother. And sadness for myself, for the grandmother I had never been, for the 22 years of a life I had missed entirely. He's in there with her now, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. They're talking. Really talking. He's telling her about his life. She's telling him about hers. It's fragile, Eleanor. It's a miracle, but it's as delicate as a spider's web. He is overwhelmed with emotion, with relief and guilt and a joy he never thought he'd feel. And then I understood. I finally, truly understood why I had to hide. My arrival would be an earthquake. It would not be the comforting presence of a mother. It would be the sudden, shocking appearance of the very person he had hidden this from his entire adult life. My presence would bring with it the ghost of his shame, the fear of my judgment, the complexity of our own broken relationship. It would shatter the sacred, delicate moment between a father and a daughter who were finding each other in the wreckage of a near tragedy. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about my need to see him, my need for forgiveness. For the first time, perhaps in a long time, my role as a mother was not to rush in, but to step back, to protect a moment that was not mine to be a part of. I looked at Sarah, my vision blurred by tears. "So I wait," I said, the words tasting of ash and acceptance. She nodded, her kind eyes holding mine. "You wait. You give him this time. This is his. When he's ready, when they are both ready, we'll let you know." I froze when I realized why I had to hide. It wasn't because he was in trouble or because he hated me. It was because he was healing. He was mending a part of his soul that had been broken for 22 years, and I was the one person whose presence could inadvertently tear the wound right open again. My love, in that moment, had to be expressed not through presence, but through absence. And so I settled into the worn armchair in that sterile, soulless room and began the longest, most painful wait of my life. The minutes in that little room stretched into an eternity. The ticking of a clock I couldn't see became the soundtrack to my unraveling. Every quiet moment was filled with the ghosts of the past, conversations I'd had with Thomas, re-examined now under the harsh light of this new reality. I saw him at 19, home from his first year at university, gaunt and quiet. I had pushed him, prodded him, asking what was wrong, assuming it was a girl or the pressure of his studies. "Just leave me alone, Mum," he'd finally snapped. And I had, feeling hurt and rejected, never imagining the chasm of grief he was navigating all by himself. I thought of all the times I had chided him for being unsettled, for not finding a nice girl, for not giving me grandchildren. Each memory was a fresh stab of guilt. I hadn't been asking for a grandchild. I had been unknowingly, cruelly, twisting a knife in a wound I never knew existed. He wasn't just a commitment phobe, as I'd so carelessly labeled him in my mind. He was a father who had lost his child, and perhaps he felt he didn't deserve the happiness of another family. How could I have been so blind? The answer was as painful as the revelation itself. I hadn't been listening. I had been projecting my own hopes, my own idea of a successful life, onto him. I wanted him to follow a path that mirrored my own with Arthur. Marriage, a steady job, children. A safe, predictable life. When he deviated, when he chose the chaotic, creative life of a graphic designer in a city I found overwhelming, I saw it as a failure. My failure. His failure. I never stopped to ask what he truly wanted or what might be driving the choices he made. I saw only the surface, and I judged it harshly. I buried my face in my hands, the rough tweed of my coat scratching my skin. The smell of Arthur's pipe tobacco, usually a comfort, now felt like an accusation. He had always been the patient one, the listener. "Go easy on the boy, Eleanor," he would say, his voice a low rumble. "He's finding his own way." After Arthur died, I think my fear for Thomas intensified. He was all I had left, and my love became a suffocating, anxious thing. I had clung too tightly, and in doing so, I had pushed him away. A soft knock on the door made me jump. Sarah entered, holding 2 cups of what smelled like tea. She placed one on the table beside me. "Thought you could use this," she said gently. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "Is there any news?" She gave me a small, reassuring smile. "They're still talking. I just checked on him to assess his concussion symptoms. He seems lucid. Distracted, of course, but that's to be understood. His daughter, Lily, she hasn't left his side. Lily, my granddaughter." The name felt foreign and yet achingly familiar on my tongue. I tried to picture her. Did she have Thomas's dark, curly hair? His thoughtful gray eyes? Did she have my high cheekbones or Arthur's steady chin? She was a person, a complete and whole person, with a life and a history and parents who had raised her. Adoptive parents. A wave of gratitude, sharp and unexpected, washed over me. I was grateful to the strangers who had loved and cared for this piece of my son, this piece of my family. What is she like? I asked Sarah, the question feeling impossibly bold. Sarah considered for a moment. She seems kind. Very composed, considering the circumstances. She told me she's a musician. A cellist. She has a wonderful, quiet strength about her. You can see how much this means to her. A cellist. My son, the artist, had a daughter who was also an artist. A pang of connection, of familial inheritance, echoed through me. Of course she was. It felt right. Another hour passed. Or maybe it was 2. Time had lost all meaning. The tea grew cold in my hands. I had cycled through every emotion, shock, grief, guilt, a strange and painful jealousy of the moment being shared in that room, and finally, a quiet, profound sense of resignation. This was not my story to direct. I was a supporting character, waiting in the wings for my cue. The door opened again. This time it wasn't Sarah. A young woman stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted by the brighter light of the corridor. She was tall and slender, with a cascade of dark, wavy hair that fell past her shoulders. She hesitated for a moment, her hands clutching the strap of a bag. As she stepped into the dim light of the room, I saw her face. And I forgot how to breathe. It was Thomas's face, but softened, refined. She had his gray eyes, the same ones that had looked up at me from a crib, but they were wider, framed by long, dark lashes. She had his mouth, but where his was often set in a serious line, hers held a natural, gentle curve. And in the shape of her jaw, the line of her cheekbones, I saw myself. I saw a photograph of my own mother, a woman I had lost when I was just a girl. It was like looking at a ghost, a memory, and a future all at once. She looked nervous, her gaze flickering between me and the floor. Sarah was standing just behind her, a steadying presence. "Lily," Sarah said softly, "this is Eleanor. Your grandmother." The word grandmother hung in the air between us, a fragile, momentous thing. Lily took a tentative step forward. "Hello," she said, her voice quiet but clear, with a London accent that was so different from my own Cornish lilt. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I wanted to rush to her, to hug her, to hold 22 years of missed time in a single embrace. But I saw the apprehension in her eyes, the sheer, overwhelming newness of it all. This young woman had found her birth father in a hospital bed only hours ago, and now here was another stranger, a grandmother she never knew she had. So I did the one thing I had failed to do with my son for so long. I waited. I held my ground, kept my hands at my sides, and offered her a watery, trembling smile. "Hello, Lily," I managed to say. It is so very good to meet you." Her shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. "You too," she replied. She gestured back toward the corridor. My dad, he told me you were here. He wants to see you." She stumbled over the word dad, as if trying it on for the first time. The sound of it, so natural yet so new, sent a fresh wave of emotion through me. "How is he?" I asked, my gaze fixed on her, trying to absorb every detail of this person who should have been a part of my life. "He's tired," she said honestly. "And his arm hurts. But his head is clearer. He's been telling me things. About his life. About you." She looked at me with an unreadable expression. "He said you were a wonderful mother." That was the blow I hadn't seen coming. After all my self-recrimination, after all the guilt, those words from my son, relayed by my granddaughter, were a balm of grace I had never expected. Tears welled in my eyes again, but this time they were not tears of pain. "He told me he was scared to tell you about me," Lily continued, her voice dropping lower. "He said he thought you'd be disappointed in him. He's carried that fear for a long time." I looked at this incredible young woman who was navigating this impossible day with so much poise, and I knew I had to be honest. For her and for Thomas. "I'm afraid he was right to be scared," Lily, I admitted, the confession costing me a great deal. "I haven't been the mother I should have been these last few years. I was rigid." And I was frightened. And I let my fear sound like judgment. The disappointment, it was never in him. It was in myself for not knowing how to help him. A flicker of understanding passed over her face. She took another step closer. "He loves you very much," she said softly. He made that very, very clear. Sarah, who had been watching us from the doorway, gave a small nod. "He's ready for you, Eleanor." My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The moment of reckoning had become a moment of reunion. I looked at Lily, this beautiful stranger who was my blood, my family. I wanted to say 1,000 things, to ask a million questions. But for now, one thing was more important. I walked towards the door, pausing beside her. I reached out, my hand hesitating in the air, before gently touching her arm. Her skin was warm. Real. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for finding him." She gave me a small, true smile, and for the first time, I saw a dimple in her left cheek. Just like Arthur's. "I think we found each other," she said. Walking down the corridor back to room 412 felt completely different. The fear was gone, replaced by a nervous, fragile hope. The air no longer smelled of antiseptic, but of second chances. Lily walked beside me, a quiet, reassuring presence. She was real. This was all real. She pushed the door open for me and stood back, giving me the space to enter alone. And there he was, my Thomas. He was propped up against a pile of pillows, his face pale and bruised on one side. His left arm was in a thick white cast, resting on a pillow. His dark hair was messy, and he looked utterly exhausted. But his eyes, his familiar gray eyes, were clear, and they were fixed on me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other across the small room, across the years of silence and misunderstanding. The wall I had imagined between us was gone. In its place was a landscape of shared pain, and now a shared, unbelievable joy. "Mum," he said, his voice raspy. I crossed the room in 3 quick strides and sank into the chair beside his bed. I took his free hand, my fingers wrapping around his. His hand felt so large, so strong. When had that happened? In my mind, it was still the small hand that had clung to mine while crossing the street. "Oh, Thomas," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. I was so scared. "I'm okay," he said, squeezing my hand. "A bit battered, but I'm okay." He looked past me, towards the door where Lily was now hovering. "You've met her, then?" "I have," I said, not taking my eyes off him. She's wonderful, Thomas. She's perfect." His eyes filled with tears, and he didn't try to hide them. "I know," he breathed. "All these years, Mum. I imagined what she would be like. What I had lost. I never, not in a million years, thought I would ever get to see her. To talk to her. Why Thomas?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me for hours. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have helped you. Dad and we would have been there for you." He looked away, his gaze falling on the white blanket. The shame he had carried for so long was still there, a shadow in his eyes. "I was 18, he said, his voice low. "I was a child. You and Dad, you had such plans for me. University, a good career. I felt like I had failed at everything before I had even started. I was so ashamed. I thought you would look at me and see this massive, catastrophic mistake. That I had ruined my life, and this girl's life, and this baby's life. The adoption. It felt like the only way to fix it. To erase the mistake. But it didn't. It just buried it. It wasn't a mistake," I said fiercely, my voice shaking. "She was never a mistake, Thomas. She is a gift." "I know that now," he said, looking back at me. "But I didn't know it then. And after Dad died. I couldn't tell you. You were so fragile. I felt like I had to be the strong one, that I couldn't possibly burden you with this huge, ancient sadness of mine. And then, we just drifted apart. It became easier not to talk than to talk, and not tell you the biggest thing in my life. The secret just got bigger and bigger, until it was all that was left between us." My heart ached with the truth of his words. We had both been trying to protect each other, and in doing so, we had built a prison of silence around ourselves. "I'm so sorry, Thomas," I said, the words coming from the deepest part of me. "I'm sorry I made you feel you couldn't tell me." I'm sorry I judged you and pushed you. I was so afraid of losing you that I did the one thing that guaranteed it would happen. I stopped listening. I'm sorry too, Mom, he said, his grip on my hand tightening. For shutting you out. For letting you believe I didn't need you. Lily had quietly entered the room and was now standing at the foot of the bed, watching us, her expression one of gentle empathy. She was a witness to the mending of this old, broken thing between her father and her grandmother. Her very existence had forced the reckoning, and now she was witnessing the reconciliation. Thomas looked at her, and a smile, the first genuine, happy smile I had seen on his face in years, lit up his tired features. She's a cellist, Mum. She plays in an orchestra. I know, I said, smiling through my tears. Sarah told me. A musician. Just like your grandfather always hoped you'd be. We talked for another hour, the words flowing easily for the first time in forever. He told me about the letter, about the week of sleepless nights leading up to their planned meeting. Lily told us about her wonderful adoptive parents, who had always been open with her about her story and had encouraged her search. She told us about her life, her music, her flat in another part of London. It was like watching a puzzle being assembled, the missing pieces clicking into place, forming a picture that was new and beautiful. As the evening drew in, a doctor came and said that Thomas needed to rest. Lily and I stood up to leave. You'll come back tomorrow? Thomas asked, a flicker of the old, boyish insecurity in his eyes. It was a look I knew so well. Of course we will, Lily answered for both of us, her voice firm and sure. I leaned down and kissed his forehead, my hand lingering on his hair. I love you, Thomas. So much. I love you too, Mum, he said, his eyes already drifting closed from exhaustion and medication. Lily and I walked out of the hospital together into the cool London night. The city lights seemed to glitter with a new promise. We were two strangers, a grandmother and a granddaughter, bound by the man we both loved who was lying in a hospital bed. We had a lifetime of catching up to do. There's a hotel just around the corner, I said. I'll get a room there for the night. Or, Lily said, turning to me with a hesitant smile, my spare room is small, but it's clean. You could stay with me if you like. The invitation was so simple, so profound. It was an offer not just of a bed, but of a beginning. It was the first stitch in a new tapestry, one that would be woven from the threads of 3 lives, brought together by a secret, a tragedy, and an overwhelming, resilient love. I would like that very much, Lily, I said, my voice full of a hope I thought I had lost forever. I would like that more than you know. As we walked towards the car park, I thought about my quiet cottage in Cornwall, my predictable life, my lonely roses. It was all waiting for me, but it would never be the same again. The silence had been broken. The void had been filled. The accident had been a terrible, frightening thing, but it had also been a strange and brutal form of grace. It had forced us all to stop, to face the truth, and to find each other in the wreckage. I had rushed to the hospital fearing an end, only to find, hidden in a quiet room and a nurse's gentle warning, the most unexpected and beautiful new beginning. I never imagined that the strangest, most foreign place I would ever visit would be a small, second-floor flat in Camden. I have been to Paris and seen the Eiffel Tower sparkle at night. I have walked the ancient, cobbled streets of Rome. But nothing, no corner of the globe, felt as profoundly alien and utterly momentous as the space behind the green-painted door that my granddaughter, Lily, unlocked with a quiet click. It was the door to a life I was never supposed to have known, and stepping across its threshold felt like stepping into another dimension. The air inside was warm and smelled of old books, fresh coffee, and something floral I couldn't quite place, perhaps the jasmine she said she loved. It was nothing like my cottage, which smelled of beeswax and sea salt and the faint, lingering memory of my husband. My home was a place of curated memories of things past. This flat was a place of vibrant, unapologetic now. Books were not just on shelves, they were in precarious stacks by the sofa. Sheet music spilled from a canvas tote bag onto the floor. And there, standing in the corner like a silent, graceful sentinel, was her cello, its polished wood gleaming in the soft lamplight. We were awkward at first. two strangers tethered by the most intimate of bonds. The adrenaline of the hospital had worn off, leaving behind a raw, tender exhaustion. "Can I make you some tea?" she asked, her voice still holding that quiet note of caution. It was the quintessential British offer, a gesture of comfort so familiar it almost made me want to weep. "That would be lovely, dear," I said, my own voice sounding formal and out of place amidst the creative chaos of her home. As she moved about the small kitchen, I let my gaze wander. On a crowded mantelpiece, among concert tickets and little ceramic birds, were photographs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked closer, my feet moving as if of their own accord. There were photos of Lily as a child, a gap-toothed grin on a beach, a serious-faced girl in a school uniform, a teenager with braces, laughing with friends. And in several of them, she was flanked by a smiling, kind-faced couple. A man with a warm smile and a woman with gentle eyes, her arm wrapped protectively around Lily's shoulders. Her parents, the people who had raised my granddaughter. Lily came back into the room, two steaming mugs in her hands. She saw where I was looking. For a moment, a flicker of apprehension crossed her face, as if she was worried I might feel resentment or jealousy. She handed me a mug. "Those are my parents," she said softly. "John and Maria." I looked from the photograph to her face, searching for the right words. What I felt wasn't jealousy. It was a deep, soul-shaking wave of gratitude that was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. These people had given her the life Thomas and his young girlfriend could not. They had tucked her in at night, helped her with her homework, and watched her grow into the remarkable young woman who stood before me. They had loved my son's daughter. They had loved her for me. "They look like wonderful people," I said, and the sincerity in my voice was absolute. "Lily, I am so grateful to them. For everything." The relief that washed over her face was palpable. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile that once again revealed the dimple I now knew was a gift from Arthur. "They are," she said. "They're the best. They were so supportive when I told them I wanted to find Thomas." We sat on her slightly lumpy sofa, sipping our tea in a comfortable silence. The barrier of strangeness was beginning to dissolve, replaced by the tentative threads of connection. She started to talk, to fill in the 22 years that were a blank canvas to me. She told me about learning the cello, about her first concert, about her father, John, driving her to lessons every Saturday without fail. She spoke of her mother, Maria, who taught her to bake and who sat with her for hours when she was heartbroken over some teenage romance. As I listened, I didn't feel the pain of what I had missed. Instead, I felt a sense of profound wonder. This life, this rich and beautiful life, had been happening all along, parallel to my own quiet existence in Cornwall. While I was pruning my roses, she was mastering Bach. While I was mourning the distance from my son, she was making her adoptive parents proud. It was a separate story that was now, miraculously, intertwining with mine. That night, sleeping in her small spare room, I didn't dream. For the first time in years, my sleep wasn't troubled by visions of Thomas drifting away from me or of Arthur disappearing into the fog. I simply slept, wrapped in the quiet knowledge that my family, which I thought had shrunk to just one distant soul, had unexpectedly, impossibly grown. The next few days fell into a new surreal rhythm. In the mornings, Lily and I would have breakfast together. I learned she liked her toast slightly burnt, just as Thomas did. I would tell her stories about her father as a boy, how he built a magnificent, if structurally unsound, treehouse in the old oak tree, how he was terrified of spiders, how he could spend hours lying in the grass, just watching the clouds. She soaked up these small details like a plant starved of water, connecting the image of the bruised, weary man in the hospital bed with the boy in my stories. Then we would go to the hospital. Thomas was getting stronger each day. The color was returning to his face, and his wit, which had always been his sharpest tool, was making a comeback. The three of us would sit together, the awkwardness of the first day replaced by an easy, gentle camaraderie. We were a strange, new constellation, learning to orbit one another. One afternoon, I brought an old photo album I'd found in the boot of my car, one I kept for sentimental reasons. I opened it on his hospital bed. There was Thomas, aged about 4, covered in mud and grinning, holding up a worm. Lily laughed, a bright, clear sound that filled the sterile room. "Oh, wow. That is definitely your face," she said to Thomas. He groaned, but he was smiling. Why would you bring that?" "Because," I said, my eyes flicking between my son and my granddaughter, "she needs to know who you were." We turned the pages together. I pointed out a photo of a young me, standing with Arthur on our wedding day. Lily traced her finger over Arthur's face. "Dad, Thomas, he told me about him. He said he was a good man." "He was the best," I said, my throat tightening. "And you, my dear, have his dimple." She touched her cheek, a look of wonder on her face. It was a tiny thing, a small inheritance, but it felt as significant as a royal decree. It was proof. It was connection. It was the thread of family, woven through generations, even when we didn't know it. Later that day, Thomas and I had a moment alone while Lily went to get coffee. He was quiet for a while, just looking at his hands. "I've been thinking about her," he said finally, his voice low. "Her birth mother, Sarah." I held my breath, knowing this was sacred ground. "We were so young," he continued. "So scared. We promised we'd never speak of it again to anyone. We went our separate ways. I haven't seen or spoken to her since. I wonder what her life has been like. I wonder if she ever thinks about Lily." "I'm sure she does, Thomas," I said softly. "How could she not?" "Part of me is terrified she'll see this in the news or something, that she'll appear," he confessed. "And part of me hopes she does. Isn't that strange? To want to share this with someone who I shared the deepest grief of my life with, but who is now a complete stranger." I reached for his hand. "It's not strange at all. It's human. Whatever happens, Thomas, we'll face it together. All of us." I looked towards the door, where Lily was returning with the coffees. He followed my gaze, and a look of pure, unadulterated love transformed his face. The shame was finally being eclipsed by a brighter emotion. The day before he was due to be discharged, Lily and I were back at her flat in the evening. The conversation had, for the first time, turned to the future. "He can't go back to his flat alone," I said, thinking aloud. "Not with that arm. He won't be able to manage." "I know," she said. "I've been thinking the same thing." "He should come home with me to Cornwall," I announced, the plan forming in my mind. "The sea air will do him good. It'll be quiet. I can look after him properly. We could get to know each other again." Lily was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea. I thought she was going to agree that it was the most sensible option. "Or," she said, looking up at me, her gray eyes serious, "he could come here. To my place. He can have the spare room. It's small, but it's closer for follow-up appointments. And I can be here in the evenings. We've missed a lot of time. It would be nice to, I don't know, to learn how to be in the same city." Her suggestion hung in the air. My plan had been about me taking care of him, about reverting to the old dynamic of mother and son. Her plan was about the future. It was about a father and daughter building something new. It was about them. And for a moment, a selfish, ugly pang of possessiveness went through me. I wanted him home. I wanted to be the one to care for him. But then I looked at her, at this incredible young woman who had navigated this emotional minefield with more grace and wisdom than I could have imagined. She wasn't trying to exclude me. She was trying to include herself in her father's life. And she was right. "That," I said slowly, swallowing my pride and my old instincts, "is a much better idea." I saw the relief in her eyes and knew I had said the right thing. "And I can stay at the hotel nearby. I'm not ready to go back to Cornwall just yet." That evening, I asked her about her cello. I had looked at it every day, this silent witness to our reunion. Would you play something for me?" I asked, feeling almost shy. She agreed without hesitation. She settled herself on a stool, propped the magnificent instrument against her knee, and lifted the bow. She closed her eyes for a moment, and then she began to play. It wasn't a famous, grand piece from a concert hall. It was something slow, melodic, and deeply melancholic, but with an undercurrent of soaring hope. The music filled the small flat, wrapping around me. It spoke of loss and longing, of quiet years spent wondering. It spoke of searching, of finding, of the bittersweet pain of reunion. It was the sound of her story. It was the sound of Thomas's secret grief. It was the sound of my lonely years. It was everything we hadn't been able to say, transformed into something beautiful and heartbreakingly pure. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't try to stop them. They were not tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of release. I was listening to my granddaughter play the cello in her own home. A month ago, I would have sooner believed I could fly to the moon. The next day, we collected Thomas from the hospital. The staff on the ward all wished him well, their faces familiar after our daily visits. Nurse Sarah gave me a hug. "I'm so glad it worked out," she whispered in my ear. "It was you," I whispered back. "You gave us that time. You gave us this chance." She just smiled and squeezed my hand. Thomas was clumsy, still in pain, but his spirit was lighter than I had seen it in a decade. Lily fussed over him, making sure he was comfortable in the taxi, while I carried his small bag of belongings. As we pulled away from the hospital, I looked back at its imposing brick facade. I had arrived there in a state of absolute terror, my world shattered. I was leaving it with a future I had never dared to dream of. We walked into Lily's flat, not as a grandmother and granddaughter bringing home an invalid, but as a family. Thomas looked around the space, at the books and the music and the photos on the mantelpiece. He looked at the life his daughter had built, a life that had thrived without him, but was now making a space for him. "It's a great place, Lils," he said, his voice thick with emotion. That evening, the three of us ate fish and chips from a paper bag, sitting on the sofa. It wasn't my fine china or a properly set table. It was messy and informal and absolutely perfect. We talked and we laughed. Thomas told a terrible joke that he'd inherited from Arthur, and Lily and I groaned in unison, a simple act of shared experience that felt monumental. As I got ready to leave for my hotel, I stood at the door, watching them. Thomas was explaining something on his laptop to Lily, his good hand pointing at the screen. She was leaning in, listening intently, her dark hair falling forward. A father and a daughter catching up on a lifetime. I had come to London to be a mother to my son. I had come expecting to rush in, to take control, to fix things. But I had learned that my role was something new now. It was to stand back, to listen, to make space. It was to be a grandmother. Walking through the lamplit streets of Camden, the city hummed with a life I had once found so intimidating. Now, it just felt like the backdrop to a new chapter. My quiet life in Cornwall was waiting, but it was no longer a retreat. It was a home base, a place to return to from this new, wonderful life that was beginning to unfold. I had thought my story was in its final chapters, a quiet epilogue of tending my garden and remembering the past. But I was wrong. A whole new volume had just begun, and its first, beautiful, astonishing pages were being written, right here, in the heart of London. The first week of my new life was a blur of black cabs and Pret a manger coffee cups, of learning the complex geography of the London Underground and the distinct rhythm of a city that never seemed to sleep. I, Eleanor Finch, a woman whose daily life was dictated by the tides and the seasons, was now living by a timetable of hospital visiting hours and the quiet hum of a Camden side street. I would wake in my sterile, anonymous hotel room, and for a fleeting moment, I would feel a sense of dislocation, a feeling of being a tourist in my own life. But then I would remember, and a deep, quiet joy would settle over me. My son was safe. I had a granddaughter. My days became a pilgrimage of love. I would walk to Lily's flat in the morning, often with pastries from a local bakery in hand. The two of us would sit and talk while Thomas slept in, his body still demanding rest to heal. In those quiet morning hours, Lily and I began to build our own bridge across the 22 years of silence. I learned that her favorite color was a deep forest green, that she was fiercely loyal to her friends, and that she had a dry, witty sense of humor that reminded me so much of Arthur. She, in turn, was an avid collector of stories about her father. She wanted to know everything. I told her about the summer he was 10 and decided he was going to become a famous archaeologist, digging up my entire rose garden in search of Roman treasure. He'd found nothing but an old bottle cap and my everlasting exasperation, but his determination had been a thing to behold. As I told the story, Lily laughed, and I could see Thomas at 10 years old, his face smudged with dirt, superimposed over her own laughing face. The family resemblances were not just in their features, but in their spirits. The afternoons at the flat were a gentle dance of three people learning new steps. Thomas, frustrated by his immobility, would try to direct us in the kitchen, giving instructions on how to chop an onion or how to properly season a soup. Lily and I would exchange amused glances, a silent conspiracy forming between us. We were a team, a grandmother and a granddaughter, united in our loving tolerance for the man we both adored. One afternoon, while Thomas was napping, Lily and I went for a walk in Regent's Park. The autumn sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows on the grass. The air was crisp. It felt good to be outside, away from the confines of hospital rooms and small flats. He told me more about the adoption, Lily said quietly as we walked along the edge of the boating lake. He told me he picked my name, Lily, because his grandmother, your mother, loved them. I stopped walking, my heart clenching. I had a faint memory of being a very little girl, holding my mother's hand in her small garden, and her telling me that lilies were the most honest flower. I hadn't thought of that in 60 years. Thomas had been so young when she died. I never imagined he would remember that, let alone carry it with him. Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She did. Her name was Lillian. Lily absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. So I was named for her, for my great-grandmother. The connection, another invisible thread pulled from the past, settled between us. It was a heritage she was being given, piece by piece. What were you like, she asked, turning to me, when you were my age? The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that in decades. I was a mother, a widow, a grandmother. The young woman I had been was a faded photograph in an album. I thought for a moment, remembering a girl with long hair and dreams of being a botanist, a girl who met a charming young man named Arthur at a village dance. I was impatient, I said with a small smile. And I thought I knew everything. I was desperate to get married and start a life, to build a home. My world was very small, and I wanted to fill it with love. I suppose, in that respect, I haven't changed very much. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile. I think you're still filling your world with love, Eleanor. In that moment, walking in a London park, I was not an old woman full of regrets. I was simply Eleanor, talking to my granddaughter, Lily, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. A week later, Thomas had his cast removed, replaced by a smaller, more manageable brace. The visible sign of his trauma was lessening, and with it, the emotional armor he had worn for so long seemed to be falling away too. He started working again, for short periods, his laptop balanced precariously as he learned to navigate his design software with one hand. I saw the focus in his eyes, the passion for his work that I had once mistaken for a refusal to grow up. I saw it now for what it was, his art, his purpose. One evening, the three of us were sitting in the living room. The television was on, but no one was watching it. A comfortable quiet had settled over us. I've been doing some searching online, Thomas said, breaking the silence. His voice was casual, but I could hear the undertone of profound significance. There are registries, ways to find people from closed adoptions, if both parties consent. Lily and I both looked at him. We knew who he was talking about. Sarah. I think, he continued, looking at Lily, I want to try and find her. Not to disrupt her life. I don't expect anything. I just want to tell her. I want to tell her that you are real and that you are here. And that you are the most incredible person I have ever met. I feel like she deserves to know that. We made this decision together, in the dark. I just want to let a little light in for her. I looked at Lily, expecting to see a complicated rush of emotions. But her expression was one of serene understanding. I'd like that, she said softly. I've had a good life, a wonderful life. I don't need another mother. But the woman who gave birth to me. I hope she's happy. I hope she doesn't carry any sadness about it. If you telling her helps with that, then I think it's a good thing. My son, who had run from this for so long, was now ready to face it with courage and compassion. And my granddaughter, who could have been filled with anger or a sense of abandonment, was instead full of grace. I was so overwhelmed with pride for both of them that I couldn't speak. I simply reached out and put my hand on Thomas's shoulder and my other on Lily's arm. My family, whole and healing. The day finally came when I knew it was time for me to go home. Thomas was growing more independent. He and Lily had found their own rhythm. They made dinner together, they watched films, they talked late into the night. My presence, which had been a necessary support, was now becoming that of a guest. And I knew, with a mother's instinct, that they needed the space to continue building their relationship, just the two of them. The farewell at Lily's front door was tearful, but not sad. It was a see you soon, not a goodbye. You'll come to Cornwall for Christmas? I asked, looking between them. Both of you. We wouldn't miss it, Thomas said, hugging me tightly with his good arm. Promise. Lily hugged me next. Her embrace was strong. Thank you for everything, Eleanor, she whispered. For the stories. For being here. Oh, my darling girl, I said, my voice breaking. The pleasure, the absolute joy, has been all mine. The drive back along the motorway was the mirror image of my frantic journey to London weeks earlier. That day, the world had been a gray blur of terror and regret. Today, I saw everything. I saw the fiery colors of the autumn leaves, the rolling green hills, the vast blue sky. I wasn't driving away from my family. I was driving towards a home that would soon be filled with them. The silence in my car was not one of dread, but of peaceful contemplation. When I pulled into my gravel driveway, the cottage looked exactly the same. The stone was solid, the roof was sound, and the climbing roses, now dormant for the winter, clung to the walls. But something was fundamentally different. It was no longer a fortress against loneliness. It was a home, waiting to be filled with new memories, with the sound of a cello, with the laughter of my son. I walked inside, the familiar scent of home wrapping around me like a blanket. I put my bags down in the hall and walked over to the old rotary phone. For weeks, its shrill ring had been the sound of my worst fears realized. I looked at it, this relic from another time, and I felt a sense of gratitude for its harsh, insistent summons. It had been the alarm that woke me from the slumber of my quiet, sad life. I went into the kitchen to put the kettle on, my movements automatic. The quiet of the house was deep, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the echoes of the last few weeks, the sound of Lily's music, the murmur of her and Thomas talking, the feeling of my son's hand in mine. I had gone to London expecting to be a caregiver, to be needed in the old way. But I had been given a far greater gift. I had been given the chance to learn a new way to love, a new way to be a mother, and the completely unexpected, glorious new role of being a grandmother. As the kettle began to whistle, a different sound filled the kitchen. It was the cheerful, modern, digital trill of my mobile phone, sitting on the counter where I'd left it. It was a sound of connection, of a life in progress. I picked it up and smiled as I saw the name on the screen. I answered, my heart full to bursting. Hello, darling, I said, my voice warm and steady. I just walked in the door. I had rushed to the hospital for my son, my world collapsing in on itself. A kind nurse had stopped me and told me to hide and wait. I had frozen when I realized that I had to hide not from a danger, but from a miracle. In that waiting, in that forced stillness, I was stripped of my old assumptions, my pride, and my fear. I had to let go of the mother I thought I needed to be, and in doing so, I found the family I never knew I had. My story, which I thought was drawing to a quiet close, had turned a page. And this new chapter, I knew with every fiber of my being, was going to be the very best one of all.